I'm sick, so I came instead. Little girl walking on a blind date. What the millionaire CEO? The bell above Maple and Honey chimed with a soft, delicate ring, the kind of sound that belonged in small towns and warm memories, not in the heart of a bustling city. Yet here it was, chiming every time someone entered, as if reminding the world that inside this bakery, life moved a little slower, a little kinder. Ethan Carter sat in the back corner booth, the one tucked between a sun-worn window and a shelf of old recipe books. He was the kind of man people instinctively straightened around, tall, handsome in a quiet way, impeccably dressed, and carrying a presence made of restraint and silence. CEO of Carter Tech, 35, widowed, a man who had learned to fold grief into stillness. He checked his watch again. 3:27 p.m. Olivia had set the date for 3:30 sharp, and Olivia was never wrong about timing or people. Her words from yesterday echoed in his head, gentle yet insistent. She's good for you, Ethan. Kind. Soft where you've become steel. She works hard. She's raising her baby alone. She deserves someone steady, and you deserve someone who lets you finally breathe. He wanted to argue, wanted to insist he wasn't ready. 3 years since he buried the woman he loved, and he still felt like he was learning how to walk again in a world that no longer made sense. But he trusted Olivia. So he came. He wasn't expecting magic, just a conversation, a reason to stay past the first cup of coffee, something small, something human. But instead of a woman walking in, the bell chimed again, and a little girl in a pink cotton dress stepped inside, tiny, with pigtails that didn't match, one perfect, one falling apart, and shoes that tapped like soft raindrops on the wooden floor. She scanned the room with huge brown eyes until they landed on him. Then she walked straight toward him. Ethan blinked once, twice. She stopped at his table, placed her hands on the edge, and announced with the confidence of a tiny queen, "My mom is sick, so I came instead." The entire bakery went still. A barista froze mid-pour. A couple near the window stared openly. Even the heater seemed to hush itself. Ethan leaned forward, instinctively softening his normally firm tone. "You came for your mom's date." She nodded, expression serious. "Dead serious." "I heard Aunt Olivia say this could make Mommy happy," she said, fiddling with the hem of her dress. "I don't know what a date is, but Mommy hasn't laughed in a really, really long time." Her voice didn't waver from fear. It wavered from honesty. Something tightened in Ethan's chest, a place that had been locked for years. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She straightened proudly. "Sophie, I'm 4.5. Mommy is Emma, she makes pies." "Emma?" Yes, he knew that name. The quiet blonde woman behind the counter, the one whose hands moved with confidence but whose smile always seemed borrowed and never fully hers. Sophie swung her feet. "My mommy wanted to cancel," she continued. "She said she was too tired and too sick, but I thought maybe if someone nice came, she would try to smile again." Ethan inhaled slowly, the weight of her words slipping beneath his ribs. This wasn't a child speaking lightly. This was a child who understood heartbreak before she understood multiplication. He slid out a chair. "Do you like hot chocolate, Sophie?" Her entire face lit up. As the waitress brought the drink, a mug piled with whipped cream and tiny chocolate shavings, Ethan watched Sophie poke the foam with careful precision, determined not to spill. She hummed under her breath, a little tune, entirely unaware that she had already changed the entire trajectory of his day. "So," Ethan said softly, "what makes your mom happy?" Sophie brightened immediately. "Oh, I know." She raised her fingers and started counting seriously. "1, when I draw her hearts. 2, when I tell her she's pretty. 3, when I say I miss Daddy but I'm glad she's here." The last part hit Ethan like a quiet blow. He had not expected to meet a 4-year-old who understood grief so intimately. And Mommy laughs when I make knock-knock jokes, Sophie added proudly. But only the silly ones, not the smart ones. Ethan chuckled genuinely, the first true laugh he'd let out in days. And she said, Sophie continued with a whisper, leaning in conspiratorially, she would only go on a date if the person is nice to me. Ethan blinked. And am I passing? He asked. Sophie studied him with the intensity of a professor. Well, she said thoughtfully, you didn't laugh when I said I came instead. That means you're nice. He swallowed. The compliment was so sincere, so unfiltered. It reached a part of him he hadn't realized was starving. And where is your little girl or boy? Sophie asked suddenly. Ethan looked down. I don't have one, he said quietly. He hesitated, a shadow crossing his eyes. I lost someone a long time ago, and I never really found my way back to people after that. Sophie went silent. Not confused. Not scared. Just listening with the strange gravity children hold when they understand sadness. I lost Daddy, she said softly. Mommy cries when she thinks I'm asleep, but I told her I'll share my heart until it doesn't hurt anymore. Ethan couldn't speak. This small, brave child was carrying her grief with more grace than most adults he knew. The waitress brought pie blueberry with cinnamon along the edges, Sophie's favorite apparently. This is Mommy's happy pie, she said, cutting it into two halves and pushing the bigger one toward Ethan. Eat it. I think you need happy pie more than me. He took a bite. Warm crust, sweet blueberries, cinnamon that wrapped around you like a memory of being loved. Then, the bakery door burst open. Sophie. A blonde woman stood there, breathless, apron still tied around her waist, hair messy, cheeks flushed. Emma. Sophie waved. Mommy, he likes your happy pie. Emma stared at them, at her child sharing pie with a stranger, at the man who looked too calm and too gentle to be dangerous, and yet too unfamiliar to be safe. Ethan stood immediately. I'm so sorry she said you were sick. I had no idea she'd come alone. Emma gathered Sophie close, pressing a trembling kiss to her daughter's hair. I turned around for 1 minute, she whispered. Sophie hugged her tighter. I just wanted you to be happy again. Emma's eyes glistened. She looked at Ethan, really looked, and instead of anger, something like gratitude softened the fear. I'm sorry she bothered you, she murmured. Ethan shook his head. She didn't bother me, he said softly. She reminded me what kindness looks like. For a moment, everything was quiet. Snow falling outside. Warm lights flickering inside. And between them stood a moment that felt like the beginning of something unexpected. Not love. Not yet. But the unmistakable hum of two broken worlds brushing against each other and recognizing the same ache. Ethan didn't leave right away. Something in the quiet way Emma held her sleeping daughter made him stay a moment longer, as if the small, warm bubble around them had pulled him in without asking permission. The bakery was almost empty now, chairs stacked, lights dimmed to the soft evening glow, the world slowing just enough for fragile truths to breathe. Emma adjusted Sophie gently, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's cheek, her movements careful and practiced, the kind of care that comes from loving someone so deeply it aches. Ethan watched, not intruding, not pushing, but trying to understand the invisible weight she carried so gracefully. You really don't need to stay, Emma said softly, though it didn't sound like she was asking him to leave. Her voice was tired, the kind of tired that lives in bones, not just muscles. I know, Ethan replied, lowering himself into the chair across from her. But I don't mind, and it looks like you could use a few minutes to just sit. Emma gave him a small, tentative smile, the kind that flickered and disappeared before it could fully settle. She looked down at Sophie, tracing tiny circles on her daughter's back with absent fingers. She has a way of running into storms without fear, she murmured. When she wants something, she just goes, even when I'm not ready. He understood more than she realized. Loss makes children brave in strange ways, and adults careful in even stranger ones. For a moment, neither spoke. The bakery heater clicked on again, humming softly. Snow drifted outside, featherlight dissolving against the window. Ethan found himself watching Emma, not her beauty, though she had plenty of it, but the softness in her exhaustion, the quiet strength in her posture, the way she held her daughter as if she'd fall apart without that anchor. She finally broke the silence. "My husband died 2 years ago." The way she said it wasn't dramatic or seeking sympathy. It was simply truth laid bare, smooth from being carried too long. Car accident. One second he was calling to say he'd be home for dinner, and the next our whole world just stopped. Her thumb brushed over Sophie's temple. She was 3, too young to understand, but somehow she understood everything. Ethan swallowed. Grief recognized grief like mirrors. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. Emma exhaled through her nose, not crying, not breaking, just remembering. "I didn't really get time to fall apart. Bills kept coming, rent doubled, childcare was impossible, so I baked. I failed miserably for months." A faint laugh escaped her, small and self-deprecating. "Burned so many pies I thought the oven hated me. But it was something I could do with her nearby, something that didn't require pretending to be okay." He listened the way someone listens to a long-forgotten language, slowly, respectfully, almost reverently. "You're stronger than you think," he said softly. Emma shook her head gently. "I don't feel strong, I just keep going, that's different." "Sometimes," Ethan said, "that's all strength is." Her eyes lifted to his, and for the first time she didn't look away immediately. There was a flicker there, recognition, maybe, or the quiet acknowledgement that someone finally understood the difference between surviving and living. Before either could say more, Sophie stirred in her sleep, blinking up at them with heavy eyelids. "Are you leaving?" she whispered to Ethan. He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Only if your mommy wants me to." Sophie turned to Emma with sleepy seriousness. Emma opened her mouth, then hesitated. Words didn't come. Instead, she reached out with her foot and nudged the empty chair closer to the table, a gesture small but unmistakable. Ethan sat back down. It wasn't permission to stay forever, just permission to stay tonight. Sometimes that's more intimate than a declaration. The next few days unfolded tenderly, quietly, almost as if the universe was trying not to startle something delicate that had just begun to breathe. Their paths crossed again sooner than expected, though perhaps not unexpectedly at all. Emma was at the grocery store on Thursday evening, her hair tied in a loose bun, her cardigan dusted with flour. She pushed the cart through the produce aisle, comparing prices, squeezing avocados like she was checking them for secrets. Sophie sat in the front basket, humming to herself and hugging a small plush bunny. She asked questions about everything: why apples were shiny, why broccoli looked like tiny trees, why avocados always felt confused. On the other side of the aisle, Ethan waited at the in-store coffee kiosk, glancing over a document his assistant had handed him. He looked out of place among discount signs and squeaky carts, but not uncomfortable, just still, until Sophie spotted him. Her eyes lit up like sparkles in a snow globe. "Look, Mommy, it's the umbrella man." Emma visibly froze, turning as if bracing for impact. Her cheeks flushed, and she suddenly seemed hyper-aware of the modest groceries in her cart: rice, yogurt, discounted veggies. Ethan approached without hesitation and without pity, just warmth. "Picking up dinner?" he asked casually. Emma nodded, a little flustered, trying to make sure Sophie eats something green at least once this week. The honesty sat between them like a small, vulnerable offering. Ethan didn't treat it like something fragile or shameful. He just nodded, as if real life didn't scare him. Sophie tugged on Emma's sleeve. "Mommy, which yogurt is cheaper? I'll get that one." The smallest sentence, but it struck something deep in Ethan's chest. They walked to checkout together. While Emma sorted through coupons, Ethan quietly stepped to another register, handed the cashier a gift card and said, "Add her groceries to this. And a few extra things she looked at but didn't take. Don't say who it's from." He returned before she noticed he'd gone. Minutes later, outside the store, Emma peeked into her bags, fresh vegetables, a warm pastry, yogurt she hadn't bought. She looked around sharply and found Ethan sitting in his car across the lot. He didn't wave, didn't beckon, didn't take credit. He just watched calmly, as if making sure she'd gotten home safe was part of the natural order of things. Their eyes met. He saw her confusion, her gratitude, her embarrassment, her relief. She saw his quiet sincerity. She mouthed barely audible, "Thank you." And that was enough. The rain began the next night without warning. Emma and Sophie were halfway home from the bus stop when the sky cracked open, spilling cold sheets of water that soaked through their clothes in seconds. Sophie whimpered, teeth chattering, her small hand gripping Emma's tightly. Then headlights cut through the downpour. Ethan's SUV rolled up beside them. He stepped out, umbrella in hand, rain flattening his dark hair instantly. He didn't ask if they needed help. He didn't ask why they were walking. He didn't ask if it was okay. He just held the umbrella over both of them and opened the car door. "Please," he said softly, "let me take you home." Pride flared in Emma for a moment, but one look at Sophie, shivering, wet shoes squeaking, made her nod. Inside the warm car, Sophie curled into the seat with a relieved sigh. When they reached Emma's building, the landlady was waiting by the porch, arms crossed, voice sharp. "You're 2 weeks late on rent. Today was the deadline. I can't keep your room open forever." Sophie wilted immediately. "Mommy, did we do something bad?" Ethan felt something inside him twist. He crouched beside Sophie, brushing wet hair from her forehead. "You did nothing wrong," he said, voice steady and warm. "You were very brave today." He didn't challenge the landlady, didn't question Emma, didn't pry. He simply said, "Good night," with a gentleness that made Emma's throat tighten. He left before she could even thank him. The next morning, there was a knock on Emma's door. The landlord stood there beaming. "6 months' rent paid, full, anonymous," she winked. "Someone must really care about you." Emma pressed her hand to her mouth. She didn't cry, but she stood frozen long after the woman left. Later, Sophie toddled out with a drawing, stick figures in crayon. A woman with yellow hair holding hands with a little girl in pink, and beside them, a tall man holding an umbrella, a bright sun overhead. "That's you and me and the umbrella man," Sophie said proudly. "He brings sunshine." Emma blinked hard. She didn't call Ethan. She didn't know how. Instead, she baked a small blueberry tart, his favorite, with a ribbon and a note. "For the man who brings sunshine quietly." Ethan found it on his desk at work. He touched the note like it was something fragile and precious. Outside his window, the city sky finally cleared. The next morning, the bell at the bakery jingled. Emma looked up, startled to see him standing there, not in a business suit, not hiding behind polite distance, just present. "I thought," he said gently, "that your tart deserved another chance." Sophie peeked from behind the counter and squealed, "Umbrella man." She ran into his arms, and he lifted her as if he'd been doing it for years. Emma watched, her breath catching at how naturally the moment flowed, like something written long before either of them arrived. They talked while customers came and went. Sophie showed him drawings. Emma made coffee. Ethan rolled up his sleeves and helped wash trays, wiping counters, whispering shy jokes that made Emma smile before she could stop herself. A woman picking up muffins looked between them and said with a wink, "Your husband is so helpful." Emma flushed deep pink. "He's in, not my." But before she could finish, Ethan glanced at her with a soft warmth that made her heart stumble. He didn't correct the woman. Not once. When the day ended, the bakery smelled of cinnamon and new beginnings. Ethan walked out, hands in his coat pockets, but not before Sophie grabbed his scarf and tugged. "Will you come again?" she asked. He hesitated, not because he didn't want to, but because he wanted it too much. "Yes," he said softly, "if your mommy wants me to." Emma swallowed. She didn't speak, but she nodded once, just once, enough. A few days later, Emma called in a rush. "Ethan, I'm so sorry, can you pick up Sophie from school? I'm stuck at work." He'd never moved faster. When Sophie saw him at the preschool gate, she sprinted into his arms and announced loudly enough for all parents to hear, "This is my new daddy." Ethan froze, then slowly knelt and whispered, "Then I need to be a very good one." He didn't correct her. He let himself belong. When Emma saw them walking toward her building later, she tried to explain, flustered. "Sophie doesn't understand. She's just little. She doesn't." He stepped closer, eyes full of something deep and steady. "I want to be her dad," he said, "if you'll let me love you both." Emma didn't speak for a long moment. Everything in her life had been broken, rebuilt, broken again. Trust was fragile. Love was dangerous. Hope was terrifying. But the way he held Sophie's hand as she hopped over puddles, the way Sophie leaned into him with absolute trust, the way he looked at Emma like she wasn't broken at all. Her heart whispered something her voice wasn't ready to say. And maybe silence was answer enough. Time unfolded with the softness of a dawn that doesn't realize it's beautiful yet, a slow, careful brightening that neither Emma nor Ethan rushed. Their days didn't change overnight. Nothing drastic or dramatic arrived to announce a new chapter. But little by little, the routines that once felt lonely began to feel shared, like a table that once held one cup now naturally made space for three. Ethan never forced himself into their lives. He simply appeared with a gentleness that didn't ask for permission to stay but earned it in the quietest ways. Some mornings he would stop by the bakery before work, not for pastries, though he adored Emma's blueberry tarts, but because Sophie insisted he come see her latest crayon creation. He always crouched down to her level, studying the drawing like it was a masterpiece, telling her exactly what he loved about it. "Your sun looks extra warm today. This flower is smiling just like you. That cat looks like it wants a nap on my lap." And Sophie giggled every time, because Ethan's kindness made even scribbles feel important. Then there were the evenings when Emma and Sophie went to Ethan's home. It was larger, quieter, too pristine at first, a place designed for the life of a man who had spent years alone. But slowly it changed, because Sophie changed it. Stickers appeared on the fridge. A plush bunny lived permanently on the couch. A tiny pink jacket hung beside Ethan's charcoal-colored coat. Emma noticed these things in passing, the way someone notices their heartbeat, not loudly but persistently. And every time she saw one of Sophie's belongings in his home, she felt something warm and steady press into her chest. They cooked together sometimes, though calling it cooking was generous. Ethan wasn't great in the kitchen. He burned pancakes, undercooked pasta, and once nearly set off the smoke alarm trying to make garlic bread. Sophie found this hilarious. Emma found it endearing. And Ethan found himself laughing more in those messy moments than he had in the last 5 years. After dinner, when cartoons played softly in the background, Sophie always crawled into his lap, resting her head against him with a comfort that felt instinctive. Ethan held her like she belonged there, one hand lightly stroking her hair, the other wrapped around Emma's fingers whenever she sat close enough. Sometimes Emma would fall asleep first, her head tipping onto his shoulder. He never woke her. He simply breathed in the scent of flour and vanilla that clung to her, memorizing it, cherishing it. Other days Ethan visited their place, not because it was easier but because it mattered. Their tiny rental wasn't much. The heater rattled. The windows creaked when the wind blew. A few floor tiles were chipped. But the first time he stepped inside after the repairs he'd quietly arranged, he felt something almost sacred. Sophie ran to show him her nightlight. Emma apologized for the clutter. Ethan didn't see clutter. He saw home, a home that had been waiting for someone to hold its missing pieces with care. He brought little fixes with him each time: a toolbox, new batteries, a set of shelves. He never asked permission, always checked with Emma first, never pushed. But she never told him no, and he noticed that too. Over time, Sophie began calling him Daddy more naturally, as if the word had simply found its rightful home on her tongue. The first time it happened in public, she tugged his sleeve at the grocery store and said, "Daddy, can we get the cereal with the tiger?" A passing mother smiled knowingly. Ethan's heart stopped, then began again, faster, deeper, fuller. He didn't correct her. Not then. Not ever again. And Emma didn't correct her either. Something unspoken had formed between all three of them. Something fragile, yet strong enough to carry the weight of their pasts. Emma's laughter became something Ethan looked forward to, the way some people look forward to holidays. It wasn't loud. It was soft, breathy, the kind that made her eyes crinkle and her shoulders relax. She laughed when Ethan struggled to fold laundry. She laughed when Sophie insisted they all wear paper crowns while eating dinner. She laughed when Ethan spilled flour on his shirt and Sophie declared him the king of mess. Every laugh was healing. Every smile another stitch mending the tears in her worn-out heart. One rainy afternoon, the three of them baked together in Emma's tiny kitchen. Flour coated the floor. Sophie had chocolate on her nose. Ethan somehow managed to drop an entire egg onto the counter, its yolk sliding off like a slow-motion disaster. Emma couldn't breathe from laughing. Her cheeks flushed pink. Her eyes sparkled. Ethan stood frozen, staring at her with a look he didn't hide anymore. One that said he would collect every one of her laughs like treasure if she let him. The kitchen smelled of butter, vanilla, and warmth. It felt like a family room, not because of the baking, but because of the way they fit into one another's spaces without trying. After the cookies cooled and Sophie drifted asleep on the couch with her bunny, Emma and Ethan sat together, sharing quiet sips of tea. He brought out a small heart-shaped pastry box. Emma expected a new tart, maybe a playful surprise, but inside was only a ring, simple, elegant, with a soft shine that looked like it had been chosen for someone who didn't need extravagance to feel cherished. Emma froze, breath catching. Ethan didn't kneel. He didn't rehearse speeches. He simply held her hand gently, his voice warm with truth. "I won't pretend I can promise perfect days or flawless choices," he said. "But if you and Sophie will let me, I'll stay. Not to replace what you lost, not to fill a space that belonged to someone else. I'll stay because I want to love you both for every tomorrow you give me." Her tears fell quietly, not from pain, from release, from the realization that she had been moving through life with wounds she didn't think anyone would ever treat gently enough to heal. But here was a man who had already begun healing them without even trying. She whispered, "We've been waiting long enough." She didn't need to say yes. Her hands said it. Her eyes said it. Her heart said it. Months passed, gentle and patient. They married in a small ceremony, nothing extravagant. A simple garden behind the bakery, fairy lights strung between trees, a soft breeze weaving through the scent of fresh bread and spring flowers. Sophie wore a pink dress and insisted on being the flower girl and ring bearer because, in her words, "I'm the most responsible." When the officiant asked if Ethan promised to love Emma and Sophie forever, Sophie shouted, "He already does." And everyone laughed, including Emma, who had never felt so cherished. Their life together didn't become perfect. There were early mornings when the bakery oven broke, days when Sophie threw tantrums, nights when exhaustion pressed heavy on their shoulders. But perfection was never what they needed. What they built was something better: quiet, consistent love. Ethan learned how Emma liked her coffee. Emma learned that Ethan hummed when he concentrated. Sophie learned that love didn't leave just because life got hard. One day Ethan surprised them by showing Sophie her new room in his house. Not a temporary space, not a guest room, but her room. Pink walls, shelves full of books, a window seat with cushions, a nightlight shaped like a bunny. Sophie threw her arms around his neck and whispered, "Now I have a forever daddy." Emma cried quietly behind them. At Maple and Honey Bakery, customers often paused at the counter where a framed photograph sat. Emma with flour on her cheek, Ethan with his sleeves rolled up, Sophie in between them holding a cupcake like a trophy. They weren't posing. They were laughing real, unfiltered joy. Beneath the frame, a handwritten sign read in Emma's careful script, "Our sweetest recipe, love, patience, and a little flour." And every morning, when the bell above the bakery door chimed softly, Sophie looked up from her coloring book, grinned, and shouted, "Daddy, here." Ethan would kiss Emma's forehead, lift Sophie onto his hip, and say, "Good morning, my girls." And Emma would smile back with the peaceful certainty of someone who had finally found the home she'd once stopped believing existed. Love didn't save them, it simply chose them, and they chose it right back every single day.